And hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative Live. It's Wednesday evening, 8 p.m., our new time slot for the live taping of Narrative Live. Thank you for being here tonight. A great show coming up. Coming up later on, we'll get into the whole FBI spy scandal that we've been investigating over the last few weeks. It's getting bigger and broader. And this time, we're going to look directly at the 2016 investigation into Donald Trump and Trump Russia and all those email investigations around Hillary Clinton and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to see if the spy scandal that is currently, devoting, certainly dedicating our minds to is whether it is in fact responsible for some of the misses of the FBI during the 2016 investigation into Donald Trump, into Hillary Clinton's emails, and then finally into Anthony Weiner's email scandal with the laptop scandal. Remember that. That is all coming up later. You'll want to stick around. There's a lot of new information coming up in that section of the show. We'll also have Rachel Bitterkoffer, the political strategist, joining us in a few minutes. She has some great thoughts and analysis on last night's very impressive speech by Joe Biden in the State of the Union address. If you were watching, as I was, and maybe a few other million people were watching, it was quite a night. And certainly, if anyone had any questions about the president's cognitive abilities, or if anyone doubted his ability to take on difficult challenges, including a room full of hostile Republicans, you have no doubts anymore, because he was quite remarkable, able to negotiate a whole part of the debt ceiling increase, remarkably in real time on live TV. It all happened last night during the State of the Union address. We're going to talk about that. We also want to get your thoughts if you're on chat, on YouTube, or on Twitter. Let us know what you think of Biden's performance last night. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to the Twitter feed and also the YouTube feeds. You just click on the little button that says subscribe. Imagine that. If you're on Twitter, you just have to follow my feed and then make sure you've got the notify button pressed, so you get notifications every time a live show comes up here on Narrative. Did you catch some of the other stuff that was going on behind the scenes at the State of the Union address, primarily involving George Santos? You remember that George Santos was not expected to actually be at yesterday's State of the Union address, but nevertheless, he showed up. He was there standing in the aisle, meeting everybody, meeting the president, trying to make as much noise as he can, getting as much attention as he could. Well, it didn't impress one person, and that person is Mitt Romney, who not only told George Santos what he thought of him, but then also went out on cameras outside and told the cameras outside what he thought of all of that. Let's take a listen to what Mitt Romney said on his way out.
He says that he embellished his record. Look, embellishing is saying you got an A when you got an A minus. Lying is saying you graduated from a college you didn't even attend. And he shouldn't be in Congress. And they're going to go through the process and hopefully get him out. But he shouldn't be there. And if he had any shame at all, he wouldn't be there.
Why did you make a point to say that, though? I mean, it was kind of out of your way to.
Well, he was standing right there in the aisle, shaking hands with everybody.
Did he respond to you?
He may have. I didn't hear.
Ooh, there's no love lost between those two, apparently. George Santos, in response, said, "Hey, Mitt Romney, just a reminder that you will never be president." And then retweeted a previous tweet of his, which indicated that Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States, that from February the 5th. I don't know if George Santos' prediction is going to be very accurate there on both counts. Who knows who's going to be the next president? But it could be Mitt Romney. I mean, it's quite possible. It may even be Donald Trump, although likely less likely today, with the Koch brothers pulling their support from Mr. Trump's campaigns. All of that was happening in the chamber, but at home where you were, there were 23 million viewers watching the Biden State of the Union address, which is not bad, but it's certainly not as good as previous years. That's surprising, because the hour or 72 minutes were quite entertaining. We had plenty of time to take a look at the heckling and the jeers of the Republican Party as the president was having a good time responding in a very informal way. It really worked out very well for him. We'll get into that in a little bit from now. But I did want to point you to something else that was happening in Congress today. There was a hearing regarding Twitter and the weaponization of social media and big tech, and what they claim is what the GOP claim is an attempt to control conservative thinking on the social media sites like Twitter and other big tech sites. Well, according to this particular GOP lawmaker, they've been trying to put this entire hearing together around the fact that they believe that Twitter was against right-wing conservatives through all those years that it was run before Elon Musk. Well, guess what? According to one surprise witness today, she came on, she was interviewed, and she had a very different story to talk about. Instead of talking about whether it was right for the New York Post story about President Biden's son and Hunter Biden's investigation to be briefly blocked by Twitter, instead of talking about that, she said the actual bias went the other way against liberals. Take a listen to this exchange. It's really remarkable. It'll change some of your thinking about how Twitter was managed throughout those years and how perhaps it's being managed right now. AOC led the questioning here at today's hearing.
You review this tweet.
Yes, it was my team's responsibility to review these tweets.
And what did you conclude?
My team, Ray, made the recommendation that for the first time we find Donald Trump in violation of Twitter's policies and use the public interest interstitial.
For the first time?
Yes.
And at the time, Twitter's policy included a specific example when it came to banned abuse against immigrants, as they specifically included the phrase, go back to your country or go back to where you came from, correct?
Yes, that was specifically included in the content moderation guidance as an example.
You brought this up to the Vice President of Trust and Safety, Del Harvey, correct?
I did, yes.
And she overrode your assessment, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
And something interesting happened after she overrode your assessment. A day or two later, Twitter seemed to have changed their policies, didn't they?
Yes, that trope, go back to where you came from, was removed from the content moderation guidance as an example.
So Twitter changed their own policy after the president violated it in order to potentially accommodate his tweet?
Yes.
Thank you. So much for bias against right wing on Twitter.
Indeed, so much for that. There's not that much bias, apparently, according to that clip. Really interesting to have that content from AOC and that witness. Now, I wonder if it'll change some of the planning for future hearings that these Republicans are trying to put, really weaponizing some of these congressional hearings against Joe Biden, weaponizing these congressional hearings against the Democrats. They've got a lot planned in the next few months, in fact, years, to really attack the credibility of the one party in our system that is actually pro-democracy. So we'll definitely follow that. And it's great to see that some people are at least are challenging the way these hearings are run. I'm laughing because my microphone is floating out of this picture. It's been that kind of a show tonight. This was all meant to be pre-taped, but we never got a chance to that. Listen, what we've got coming up is incredible stuff. Coming up, we've got to talk about the McGonigal affair, the big spy scandal at the FBI. We're going to try to figure out whether any of that had an impact on the 2016 investigation into Donald Trump or the 2016 investigation into Hillary Clinton or into Anthony Weiner's laptop. All of that is coming up in just a few minutes, but we wanted to speak to the incredible Rachel Bitterkoffer, the political strategist. Does a lot of great work for the Democratic side of the...
And that's because they're a threat to democracy and stripping women's fundamental freedoms away, right? And the verdict of MAGA land, which controls 70% or executing us or whatever you do once you're moving past in the policy space national abortion bans and establishing autocratic, and that's because they're a threat to democracy and stripping women's fundamental freedoms away, right? And the verdict of MAGA land, which controls 70% of the party and thus the power, that's not what happened, okay? They lost because they weren't MAGA enough. They should have been talking about jailing us or executing us or whatever you do once you're moving past in the policy space national abortion bans and establishing autocratic, and that's because they're a threat to democracy and stripping women's fundamental freedoms away, right? And the verdict of MAGA land, which controls 70% of the party and thus the power, that's not what happened, okay? They lost because they weren't MAGA enough. They should have been talking about jailing us or executing us or whatever you do once you're moving past in the policy space national abortion bans and establishing autocratic, and that's because they're a threat to democracy and stripping women's fundamental freedoms away, right? And the verdict of MAGA land, which controls 70% of the party and thus the power.
Boy, I have no idea what's going on there, but that certainly was not what I was expecting to come out of that clip. Sorry, Rachel. Sorry to everybody else. I'm going to figure out why that is only 24 seconds and in constant repetition of itself. Boy, we're having a bit of a show tonight, aren't we? Welcome, everybody. It's nice to have you here. Step inside. You never know what will happen. And it's certainly going to be an interesting ride tonight. By the way, if you are chatting to us, if you want to talk to us, please go to the YouTube chat. I'm monitoring what people are saying. Carolyn Garman is saying Mitt Romney told him, "You don't belong here." This is about George Santos. John Welsh is saying Twitter is a private company. So what? AOC is so intelligent. Love her, says Martha Salinas. We'll take more of your comments as we go through this evening. Please join us on YouTube or on Twitter, and we'll get your comments tonight. I was hoping to let Rachel do the whole thing there, and hopefully we'll be able to still process that so we can listen to the whole interview with her. It's certainly not great not having her thoughts with us, because they really are remarkable. But I'm going to move on a little bit now. I'm going to play a little bit of a promo spot for my new series that's coming up next week or the week after. It might be delayed a week, but it's going to be an incredible series all about Rupert Murdoch. It's called Spy Murdoch, and that premieres, hopefully, if everything goes well, next week or the week after. There's definitely a lot in that show. Let's take a look at that promo, and then on the other side, we're going to talk about the McGonigal affair and whether it really does impact the 2016 elections, whether it really did have an impact on the investigations at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., or the New York field office in New York that had so much impact on the last few years since Donald Trump took over. If that FBI investigation had operated differently, if the timing was different, we could have had a very different result in 2016 than the one we got. So we'll get into that right after this. And thank you very much for being here on Narativ tonight.
Hey, it's Zev from Narativ. I'm excited to announce the launch of my new original series, Spy Murdoch. This is an epic story of Rupert Murdoch as an intelligence asset, and it's all 100% true. Spy Murdoch will premiere in February on Narativ's Patreon feed and Narativ's new premium YouTube channel. Now, to join either of those services, you can either head over to patreon.com/narrative and sign up there, or to join our new YouTube premium channel, just look for the join button underneath the screen when you're watching on YouTube. This is brand new content with bombshell revelations that have never been revealed before about the iconic Murdoch. We will explain, amongst many other things, how Fox News gained such a foothold in the United States. For a limited time, we're offering access to all our premium content for just $5 a month. Prices will go up, so lock in today. You'll have a front row seat as I unravel the secrets of Rupert Murdoch for the first time. Don't miss this opportunity to be among the first to learn these brand new details and watch this Narativ original series with me. It'll change the way you view history and your place in it. That's Spy Murdoch, beginning in February on Narativ.
And welcome back. You're watching Narativ Live, and our investigation into Charlie McGonigal and the biggest spy scandal in the last few decades at the FBI continues tonight. Last week, we told you about our investigation into McGonigal. The biggest piece of it was, of course, the fact that at the same time that he was a supervising agent in charge of the counterintelligence department at the FBI's New York field office, he was also receiving large amounts of money from the Albanian prime minister, it appears like, and Albanian businessmen connected to the prime minister in order to do some really funny business at the FBI, including chasing some of the opposition figures in Albania, but more importantly, creating a lot of bribery and corruption, and even some vetting challenges to some of the leading politicians of Albania. So that is interesting on its own, but what makes it more interesting is that he was also working for Oleg Deripaska post-retirement. Oleg Deripaska, of course, is the very prominent oligarch that's attached to Vladimir Putin in many, many ways. We've covered him a lot on the show. So to have someone like that very involved in Trump Russia, then have an FBI supervising agent in his employ for those years, and knowing now what we know about his previous corruption or potentially alleged corruption at the FBI, it certainly is a massive scandal worth telling. We also told you about that there were 4, in fact, former agents, including McGonigal, that had their fingerprints a little bit on some of the scandal. So even though McGonigal is the only one that has been ultimately charged right now, there are 3 others who maybe have turned against him, and we'll discuss that, the implications of that coming up. Now, the big question is not really about, how much damage did he cause once he was working for Deripaska post 2018. The real question is, if there was a corrupt agent, if there was a mole inside the New York field office, if Charlie McGonigal was corrupted for a longer period of time that preceded his check from the Albanian government, what if he was corrupt during the entire process that the investigation into Trump Russia was happening? What if he was feeding information to various sources, including maybe Donald Trump, about what was going on in the investigation? And then also what was happening with the Hillary Clinton email investigations? Those were also coming out of the same New York field office and the same departments in Washington, D.C. It's a tremendous amount of really interesting and complicated back-checking now that the United States FBI has to go through and figure out exactly what was compromised and what wasn't compromised, if they can figure it out. But in my mind, the way things look right now, it certainly doesn't look like you can look at those years, look at those investigations, especially with all the investigations that followed it, and claim that we were, in fact, had a clean investigation into Donald Trump, or a clean investigation into Hillary Clinton or her emails, and for that matter, Anthony Weiner's laptop. Now, what we know as the email, as the email scandal of 2016 is actually multiple email scandals in one. And this is why I've said here on the side here that 2016 was really a battle between these 2 narratives: emails on the one side, Russia versus the other side. Emails, of course, for Hillary Clinton, Russia for Donald Trump. And it was set up that way. And yet there seems to be way, a large amount of it was influenced by what was going on at the FBI. Way more now when we look at it in hindsight than we realized at the time. So there were really 3 aspects to, maybe even more aspects to, what this email scandal itself looked like. We know that Trump Russia had various elements to it, well, so did the email scandal. It started off with the initial email scandal, which was the one involving the servers in the Clintons' basement, where they were housing some of the State Department's emails. You remember that? That was a big scandal. The second part came up when in October, at least the second one came up in July, when the GRU attempted to try and did in fact hack the Democratic National Committee, and was able to extract a lot of emails from there that was related to other people's, not necessarily Hillary Clinton's emails, but that came out during that hack. There was this secondary aspect of the search for 30,000 missing emails, which Donald Trump had asked his followers to do. There was, in fact, a big search for those 30,000 missing emails. Then there's a WikiLeaks aspect of the emails. And finally, towards the end of the summer, into the fall of 2016, there was the Weiner laptop discovery. And on that laptop, guess what? There were even more Hillary Clinton emails. So you can see that the email theme kept coming up again and again and again. And if it weren't for the FBI, if it weren't for these investigations, who knows if the emails would have even been that much of an issue in the elections. Let's take a look at exactly what I'm talking about here. So, but her emails, you remember that was the big funny line that everyone kept saying? Well, the first set of investigations, let's call it the home server investigations, they were cleared by Comey on July the 5th. Then during July, there was the GRU hack of the DNC, and then there was the Papadopoulos revelations that the Russia was helping get some dirt on Hillary Clinton, and that was fed up to the FBI. George Papadopoulos turned out to be an advisor for Donald Trump, and also appears a witness in this prosecution against Russia as an attempt to provide dirt to the Trump campaign on Hillary Clinton. And then there's the Weiner laptop, which happened to sort of late October, early November. So you can see that without the FBI's consistent bringing these things up, we probably wouldn't have had as dramatic a finish to the election campaign. And that's important because, as we've been pointing out, there was potentially a mole inside the FBI New York field office. And if there was a mole inside the FBI New York field office, boy, wouldn't it be easy for them to use that information to sell information to both the Trump campaign and maybe even the Clinton campaign, because so much of the events of that summer, so much of the events of that election campaign revolved particularly around this question of emails and Russia. Those are the two questions the FBI found itself prosecuting. But let's take you back now to July 5th. This is when it was all meant to be over. This is when Jim Comey stepped out. Unusually, I would say, this was not a typical press conference, but stepped out to say, hey, listen, Hillary, yes, there were some emails found on her server, but some things weren't looking so kosher. So we don't think it's a crime, but boy, we're not impressed. It's the kind of thing which is, it's going to stain the campaign no matter how you go through it. She's cleared, but something smelly going on is basically the impression you got from Jim Comey. Let's take a look at what he said that day.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information. For example, 7 email chains concern matters that were classified at the top secret special access program at the time they were sent and received. Those chains involve Secretary Clinton both sending emails about those matters and receiving emails about those same matters. There is evidence to support a conclusion that any reasonable person in Secretary Clinton's position or in the position of those with whom she was corresponding about those matters should have known that an unclassified system was no place for that conversation. In addition to this highly sensitive information, we also found information that was properly classified as secret by the U.S. intelligence community at the time it was discussed on email. That is, excluding any later up-classified emails. None of these emails should have been on any kind of unclassified system, but their presence is especially concerning because all of these emails were housed on unclassified personal servers, not even supported by full-time security staff like those found at agencies and departments of the United States government, or even with a commercial email service like Gmail. I think it's also important to say something about the marking of classified information. Only a very small number of the emails here containing classified information bore markings that indicated the presence of classified information. But even if information is not marked classified in an email, participants who know or should know that the subject matter is classified are still obligated to protect it. Mishandling of classified information or vast quantities of information exposed in such a way as to support an inference of intentional misconduct, or indications of disloyalty to the United States, or efforts to obstruct justice. We do not see those things here. To be clear, this is not to suggest that in similar circumstances, a person who engaged in this activity would face no consequences. To the contrary, those individuals are often subject to security or administrative sanctions, but that's not what we're deciding now.
Indeed, that wasn't what they were deciding now. That was a difficult press conference for everyone in the Clinton campaign. And already in July, the Clinton campaign was so sure they were going to win. They had such an indication that they were, not only the front runners, they're clearly a more polished team than Donald Trump had. And so to see, Jim Comey stepping up into the limelight in July already. I mean, we all, in our heads, we all remember the November and October Wiener email things, but that he was doing this in July tells you a lot about how involved the FBI felt they had to be in every aspect of this election and continuously to do so. So let's follow some of this paper trail and some of this timeline that's available to us from these various investigations. There have been many investigations into what happened in 2016. We've tried to pull the different pieces from each of these to give us a better understanding of what happened. So, between April and or maybe it's March and May, there was a lot of GRU hacking activity that happened, including the actual hack of the DNC and the DCCC servers. This was done out of the GRU. The Russians were, compromising the DNC. They were clearly in favor of Donald Trump, and they had gathered these emails. They gave it to WikiLeaks, and then, as we all know, WikiLeaks published them later on. Now, while this was all happening, in May 2016, a tip came to the FBI. It came via a foreign office of the FBI, and it came from George Papadopoulos, who many of you will recall was an advisor, foreign policy advisor to Donald Trump. Mr. Papadopoulos told the FBI that he said that there was a suggestion that the Trump team had received some kind of suggestion from Russia that it could assist this process with the anonymous release of information during the campaign that would be damaging to Mrs. Clinton. So here you've got a Trump insider, although I'm not sure he revealed himself as that, but he was a Trump insider saying that the Russians were ready to step in and help to help this investigation go on. This is a remarkable thing, because this really triggered the investigation known as Crossfire Hurricane. It really triggered the investigation of the entire FBI to really focus on Donald Trump and whether he was connected to Russia. Now think about it. Someone from the Trump-Russia campaign calls the FBI up and says, hey, well, it wasn't him, actually. It was an Australian ambassador. But never mind that. The actual evidence came from George Papadopoulos. But imagine the result of that is really what we're saying, is that you've got the Trump campaign basically tipping the FBI off that they might be colluding with Russia. I mean, that sounds a bit ludicrous. But nevertheless, that's how it happened. Then came this press conference we just saw in July the 5th when Comey clears Clinton. And then later in July, I don't know exact date, but I think towards the end of July, George Papadopoulos' tip reaches who? It reaches Charlie McConigal. Charlie McConigal at the time was the supervising agent in charge of the Cyber Counterintelligence Unit in Washington, D.C. This was prior to him moving to the New York field office in September 2016. He was still, at this time, in the summer of 2016, working in Washington, D.C. In the Cyber Counterintelligence Hacking Unit. Not hacking, the Counterintelligence Unit. And the basic job there was to figure out if things were conflicting, if different departments were covering the same or attempting to investigate the same crimes. He'd resolve so many of those issues. But think about this now. I mean, think about with the knowledge we have now that Mr. McGonigal was in fact on the payroll later on of the Albanian government, and it appears to do some trouble in Albania for the Russians. When we think about the fact that he landed up being an employee of Oleg Deripaska for an extended period of time after he left the New York field office, isn't it unusual and kind of messy that the Trump campaign insider, George Papadopoulos' tip, lands up going to Oleg Deripaska's potential guy inside the FBI in Charlie McGonigal? Doesn't it just not look good that we know that that's where the tip landed up going? That didn't necessarily stay there. Ultimately, it landed up being the Crossfire Hurricane investigation that was, under Special Agent Strzok at the time. That investigation, as far as we know, maybe it was not compromised in any way, but just the visual optics of the whole thing of having a guy like Charlie McGonigal be the recipient of that initial tip by George Papadopoulos certainly made me think, this doesn't seem quite as clean as you'd imagine, and certainly deserves an investigation. We certainly need to go back and figure out exactly whether Charlie McGonigal was involved at that time. So that's the Papadopoulos question, and it's a question that we need to ask. I'd say we also need to be asking, was McGonigal involved in the Clinton email investigation? Because that is also an important question. Was he quoting things to Jim Comey? I know Strzok was. Peter Strzok was amongst the people who was writing those letters that Jim McKay pushed out in September and October. McKay was also there. A lot of people were involved in this amalgam that became the email scandal inside the FBI. But we haven't heard if Charles McGonigal was involved. seems likely he would be involved, considering all the things that he used to cover. I mean, counterintelligence, cyber, New York field office counterintelligence. You'd think he'd be involved. The second thing we have to answer is, was there a George Papadopoulos connection to Charles McGonigal? I mean, is there any possibility that that whole thing was maybe a bit of a setup? You know, George calls or at least the ambassador calls the embassy calls the Philadelphia field office. The Philadelphia field office gets in touch with McGonigal, and that's where the tip lands up getting high prominence inside the headquarters of the FBI, because maybe the people who launched that investigation, who gave us that tip, were actually very interested in that particular tip becoming a big investigation. Maybe the desire to have Donald Trump links to Russia, maybe that was quite big because they knew that that could be managed. Whether if they had done the real thing, which would have been, was there any foreign influence involving the election of Donald Trump? Now, that would have been a very different result. But they didn't. They just focused narrowly on Trump-Russia. So what's that narrow focus just on Trump-Russia designed to not only launch the investigation, but also cripple the investigation right at its start? Because, you know, as we know, Russia was only one of the main players involved in the attack on democracy in 2016. And certainly if a guy like McGonigal is compromised, and we know Rod Rosenstein was later finding his way to work for the Israelis at the NSO group. Well, those are questions that you really have to start thinking about. You know, were other nations involved in the setting up of the Trump Russia investigation at the headquarters? There were other nations involved in supporting Mr. McGonigal or other FBI agents in corrupting them. And in fact, we are aware that there was, if I recall correctly, in the Mueller investigation, a question around George Papadopoulos. It seems to me that Mueller wanted to declare George Papadopoulos a agent of the Israeli state. And he didn't. But maybe he was an agent of the Israeli state. That would be interesting. If Israel and an Israeli agent calls up and says, hey, Donald Trump may be getting help from Russia. Look at those guys. Look at Russia. Then you start to understand why it was such an imperative to get this investigation started by the FBI, to get to the headquarters of FBI and get them to launch this massive investigation into whether Trump was involved with Russia, when who knows, maybe that was just a bit of not completely inaccurate, because we certainly know there was a lot of influence operation and peddling going on there, but maybe it was a way to sort of make him unconvictable because all the other nations he was involved in could not be investigated. So those are the three questions I think are very valid in asking up at this point. But I also think we need to ask this next question, which is, was McGonigal involved in the GRU hack and leak? This is information I can't really, in the investigation of those hacks and leaks, I should say. I've tried very hard to figure this out. It's nowhere specific in any of the investigations I've seen that he was, in fact, handling these investigations, that he was involved in the hack and leak. But I'll show you what I did find, and we'll go from there, shall we? The initial report here, let me just pull this up full screen so you guys can see exactly what I'm reading at the same time. So first page here this is from the Russia investigation from the Senate Intelligence Committee. They pointed to interesting things here. In number U over there, Wasserman Schultz told the committee that she was never told that the FBI had any interest in or requested access to the DNC servers. In fact, Wasserman Schultz said that she understood that the DNC cooperated with the FBI through the transition to the new servers, and that if there was a request, we most definitely would have provided access to our servers. Wasserman Schultz told the committee that she believed her imperative as chair was to address the intrusions and make sure that whatever information the FBI would have, they got it. That's a very interesting statement there by Wasserman Schultz, alleging, perhaps, that they weren't getting all the information they needed from the FBI. It goes on in this next paragraph to say, Trainer, who is, by the way, a Cyber Division Unit Chief, AD Trainer, who was looking at this investigation. Don't forget that McGonigal was cyber and counterintelligence. So certainly those could have crossed over. But in this particular paragraph that I'm pointing to here, Trainer recalled that Henry and Sussman had expressed frustration that the FBI had not notified the DNC of the Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear intrusion earlier. But as Trainer pointed out to Henry and Sussman, the FBI had notified the DNC quickly and repeatedly about Fancy Bear intrusions in March to April 2016. There's conflicting reports there about whether the FBI was providing the right information to both the group at the DNC, but also their investigators at Strike. What's the name of that company that they did the investigating? Strike Watch or something like that? CrowdStrike. Good name. Yeah. Trainer remembered describing the FBI's ideal cooperation scenario in that meeting. So why is this important? It's important because it seems that during the GRU DNC investigation by the FBI, there was some conflict. It wasn't as clean cut. It wasn't it wasn't fully cooperating between these two sides. And it makes sense, really, when you consider that the political environment into which they were launching this investigation. We had all come through months and months of emails, investigations by the FBI, having just had Hillary Clinton cleared by Jim Comey, and then here comes another investigation from the FBI. And I want to point you to this note again here. This is from the Russia investigation at this volume 5 of the Senate Investigation Intelligence Committee. The DNC was hesitant to engage with the Bureau on the matter of the political organization being under attack by a foreign country's intelligence services, owing to resident tensions stemming from the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's email servers. Further complicating matters, the DNC IT staff did not understand the nature of the threat it faced. Despite multiple entreaties from the FBI agent at the Washington field office, the committee investigated allegations that the FBI did not properly escalate its concerns about the DNC hack and that the DNC did not fully cooperate with the FBI. The committee found that communication on both sides was inadequate, further confusing an already complex situation. Well, that doesn't sound like a very clean investigation. It does sound like a lot may have gone wrong, that communication may have broken down. At the end of the day, if you've got parties that are suspicious of each other, and can you imagine the leading political party in the country being suspicious of the FBI, the leading investigators in the country? Well, that certainly creates attention. Why were they so suspect? Well, they've just come through all these months about emails being stored in a home server, completely nonsense. But nevertheless, the FBI was investigating it. It all actually reminds me a lot of what's going on right now with Joe Biden and the documents, the classified documents, so-called fiasco. Really, do we care this much about whether the president of the United States has some old documents at his home? Not really. We only care about it because the other former president of the United States appeared to be selling them on the world market to the highest bidder and compromising our CIA operations. That's why we care about it. But no, we shouldn't be spending time investigating Joe Biden, who's clearly a very patriotic president, for leaving a few documents behind at home. I mean, give me a break. It's ridiculous. It's the same kind of thing that we're seeing here way back in 2016 when you've got Hillary Clinton's emails. But I mean, so what? You all have emails stored in various places. We all wish we could be completely buttoned down and secured, but let's face it, it's tough to be buttoned down and secured with so many email accounts, with so many different gadgets, so many devices. If there's an email missing and going in the wrong place, well, maybe the IT department should answer for it and not the politicians in question. Because really, what are we doing? Why are we allowing these foreign intelligence agencies to weaponize our police forces, our investigative bureau, and challenging them? So, okay, so someone's saying to me, Vincina says, I think you got your timeline wrong with Comey. Go ahead. Tell me what you got. I want to hear it. It says here, technical difficulties that keep happening with, yes, it's true. Technical difficulties keep happening because I'm a one-man band. I don't operate in any network. And for anyone who knows, as this person is suggesting here, that I work with MSW Media or Midas, I think that's not likely to happen considering their history here. Okay, so let me if anyone wants to explain to me why I have the timing wrong, Vincina, I'd love to know exactly what you're talking about there, because that would be very, very helpful to me. So if I did get something wrong, I always want to correct it on the air. So please get back to me if you can do that. So anyone else have any comments on those? I'd rather not continue. If there is some incorrect information, I'd rather get it from you right now. So I'm going to ask, if I can, for you guys to tell me what is, in your opinion, not correct about those numbers or those dates. And in the meantime, I'm going to open up my Twitter feed over here and ask you guys to, where is it now? By the way, this is a live show. We do this live show as a live taping. It's not the actual live show. It's just so popular. We just keep doing it. The actual show is the edited podcast, which comes out as a podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. As a video feed and an audio feed that doesn't have any of these fun interruptions. So, if you're worried or concerned in any way about how this is, the technical issues here, and you want to avoid the technical issues on the show, we do it live as a live taping because we can get feedback from our audience as we are right now. It helps me gauge what you guys are thinking as we go along through the show. It's not designed to be something that supplants the other show, which is the main show that we do. So I'm going to try open up now this feed here that we have and just see if you guys have commented in any way. If anyone has information how this information may be different or wrong in any way, please let me know. You can do that right now by going onto the Twitter feed. I'm monitoring the chats there, and I'm also monitoring the chats at YouTube. If you feel like the information is wrong on any of these dates, let me know. Otherwise, I might as well just continue if there's no one responding there. Not sure why. Does anyone else have any thoughts about that, about the timing here? No. Okay. All right, so I'm not sure what they're talking about there. Thanks for those comments. So I really do need as much fact checking as we can. It's one of the ways we're able to avoid getting in trouble on the show, is knowing that you guys are watching for us. And if there's any mistakes that I've made, I apologize and really would like to know. Yeah, no, she's not responding. So who knows what that is wrong with the timeline. Let's continue now. We had gotten to the DNC. Okay, people say the timeline seems accurate. I'm going to keep going. So the DNC was hesitant to engage in this investigation. Obvious reasons why. I think it's worthy asking the question, was McGonigal actually involved in this investigation? What was his responsibility in this investigation? Could he have in some way influenced the results of this investigation? I mean, we know that Roger Stone was talking to WikiLeaks. We know that, to Guccifer, and that Guccifer was talking to WikiLeaks, and that we were getting all this coordinated dump of material that came down the line from Russian intelligence agencies. It seems to me that if you've got that happening, someone like Roger Stone would be investigated. Someone like Roger Stone would be questioned. And yet, throughout that whole period of 2016 in the summer, nothing seemed to happen with that very vast investigation. So, I think it's worthy asking of that question. Was he involved in the GRU hack investigations and in the ultimate leaks of those investigations? Because nothing ever came of those investigations, frustratingly so. All right, so now it's the George Papadopoulos and Crossfire Hurricane investigation. So the reason, according to the Inspector General, according to the FBI, that the Crossfire Hurricane investigation into Donald Trump and Russia, why did it come about? It came about because of this George Papadopoulos tip that came in through the foreign services. So let me throw up what I have here in terms of supporting documentation. And I think this is right. That seems to be the wrong one. This one. Okay. So I am going to take you down here to this page. That's not the right one either. Second. This page. Okay. So I'll pull it up full screen as well so you guys can follow along as we talk about what we're seeing here. This is regarding the George Papadopoulos investigation. So it says here that in March 2016, this is from the Inspector General's report, Horowitz's report on the origins of 2016. So by March 2016, Papadopoulos, Page, and Flynn were among several individuals serving as foreign policy advisors for the Trump campaign. Manafort joined the Trump campaign in March 2016 as a campaign convention manager. In the weeks that followed, Papadopoulos met with officials of an FFG in European city that had arranged several meetings in May 2016 to engage with members of the Trump campaign. During one of these meetings, Papadopoulos reportedly suggested to an FFG official that the Trump campaign received some kind of suggestion from Russia that it could assist the campaign by anonymously releasing derogatory information about presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. However, the FFG did not provide information about Papadopoulos' statements to the U.S. government at the time. So that's interesting. That all happened back in March 2016. There's some indication to this foreign delegate that there is potentially help coming from Russia. It doesn't get to them until, or it doesn't get to the FBI until much later. So during October 2015, if you look at the footnotes below, testimony before the House Judiciary Committee and House Committee on Government Reform and Oversight, Papadopoulos stated that the source of the information he shared with the FFG official was a professor from London, Joseph Mifsud. Papadopoulos testified that Mifsud provided him with this information about the Russians possessing dirt on Hillary Clinton. Papadopoulos raised the possibility of, during that congressional testimony, that Mifsud might have been working with the FBI, and this was some sort of operation to entrap Papadopoulos. As discussed in the Chapter 10 of this report, the OIG searched the FBI's database of confidential human sources and did not find any records indicating that Mifsud was an FBI confidential human source, or that Mifsud's discussions with Papadopoulos were part of the FBI operation. In Chapter 10, we also note that the FBI requested information. So, it took until July 26th, 2016, 4 days after the WikiLeaks publicly released hacked emails from the DNC, that the FFG officials finally did call a U.S. government official in the European city about an urgent matter that required in-person meeting. At the meeting, the official informed the U.S. government official of the meeting with Papadopoulos. The foreign government official also provided information from the foreign government official following the May 2016 meeting hereinafter referred to as the FFG information. So this is the Australian High Commissioner, I believe, or the British High Commissioner in Australia. I can't remember which one it was. But nevertheless, that's where the information came from. It's got funneled from George Papadopoulos all the way through this foreign official, and then it lands up at the FBI on July 26th after being first discussed in March 2016. So let's back up our timeline over here, because it's really fascinating and instructive for us to see how this falls into the timeline of July. You can see that just a few weeks after Comey clears Clinton in the original email scandal, here comes George Papadopoulos' tip that goes to Charlie McConigal directly at the FBI headquarters via the Philadelphia office, and that's on July 26th. And by July 31st, Crossfire Hurricane was launched, a very significant investigation. So Crossfire Hurricane, just to remind everybody, was the investigation that the FBI launched in order to investigate whether there were any real ties between Trump and Russia. This is a counterintelligence investigation, if I'm not mistaken. And it's described in its blurb as this. This investigation is being opened to determine whether individuals associated with the Trump campaign or are witting or coordinating activities with the government of Russia. That was the scope of the investigation of Crossfire Hurricane. It was a messy investigation. Of course, it never really got anywhere. Crossfire Hurricane was just this ginormous mush that never really achieved very much. At one point, Peter Strzok gave up. He was like, I don't know what I can do with this. I can't get access to the finances of Donald Trump. How can I possibly investigate whether he's been bribed? And therefore, this thing just sputtered along all the way through July. We'll tell you a little bit later on about how there was conflict with and conflicting information around the Steele dossier that was never investigated by Crossfire Hurricane. It was a messy investigation. Now, admittedly, a very unusual investigation that was certainly very important and didn't quite fulfill everyone's needs. But you can see you've got a summer full of activity, and just that 1 month in July, you've got so much FBI interference in the political process. It's quite uncanny. Between one press conference saying, "Hey, Hillary Clinton is cleared," and the next launching of a investigation into Donald Trump, and then this third piece of it, which is really, who is George Papadopoulos? Is he representing Israel? Is that who is actually setting up this tip to get into the hands of Charlie McGonigal? And how is that important? Well, it's important because we're also looking at Charlie McGonigal's investigations, connections potentially with other people in the Israel orbit, in the Bibi Netanyahu orbit. Is he, in fact, related to any of those people in the orbit financially? Is he getting money from any of people in Bibi's orbit? And is there a connection there between those two things? We don't know the answer. We just do not know the answer to that. But, knowing that Papadopoulos was either being influenced by the Israelis would certainly have a very important influence in that. So now let's go into the next slide here. So this is... again, we're dealing with George Papadopoulos and that investigation. And by the way, I think there's a comment here saying that the Comey the Comey information that I provided is correct. So there was no issue with the data we provided earlier. So I might have said that, but just to repeat it to people if you didn't catch it earlier on. So from July 28th to July 31st, information on whether let me get the slide up for you so you guys can follow along at the same time. Are we here? Boy, it's a big deck of cards tonight, because it is a big scandal. I think that we're beginning to understand the scope of this giant scandal. It really is well beyond what we thought when we first started to investigate this small FBI agent that might have been, compromised. Now we're looking at something that has tremendous implications across every one of these investigations, or potentially could have. So this document here. Is again, I think, from the dossier, the Inspector General report. Again, give me 1 second here to make sure that I handle it correctly. Here we go. Okay, so here it says that from 28th July to July 31st, the information on whether it warranted opening a counter, they were basically discussing at FBI headquarters where there was, and I apologize for that yellow line going through the particular line. There's nothing redacted there. It basically just says that at FBI headquarters, they were assessing the FFG, the foreign government information, and whether it warranted opening a counterintelligence investigation. The assistant director for CD, I'm going to show what that is, but it's for CD, E.W. Bill Priestap was a central figure in these discussions. According to Priestap, he discussed the matter with the then section chief of CD's counter-espionage section, Peter Strzok, as well as the section chief of CD's counterintelligence analysis section, Intel section chief, and with representatives of the FBI's Office of the General Counsel, including Deputy General Counsel Tricia Anderson and a unit chief, OGC unit chief, and OGC's National Security and Cyber Law Branch, NSCLB. Priestap told us that he also discussed the matter with either the Deputy Director, Andrew McCabe, or the Executive Assistant Director, Michael Steinbuch, but he did not recall discussing the matter with the Director, James Comey. And he told that the OIG that he did not recall being briefed on the FFG information until after the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was opened, and that he was not involved in the decision to open the case. McCabe said that although he did not specifically recall meeting with Comey immediately after the FFG information was revealed, it was the kind of thing that you would have brought directly to Director Comey's attention immediately. Well, no doubt. I mean, there are so many questions now that we have to go back, realizing that there was some sort of potential compromise going on in the offices of the FBI, where potentially foreign governments were involved in buying off agents. Well, you have to wonder, why didn't Jim Comey know about how could it be that he did not know about Crossfire Hurricane? How is it possible that the FBI director, who just weeks earlier was so obsessed with another candidate's email service that he gave his own press conference, now he's not even aware that a counterintelligence operation is happening? How is that possible? How is that even possible? And then the suggestion that McCabe is making here is that Comey did know, but he's hiding it. Well, that's a question too. Why did that happen? How did that happen? And, as you're reading the section, you might be saying, well, wait, didn't you say that this particular tip went to Charlie McConigal? Yeah, it did. It did go to Charlie McConigal. And in fact, at the sentence above here, the same day, the EC was emailed to the section chief of the Cyber Counterintelligence Coordination section at the FBI. That is Charlie McConigal. So that's just above that red circle where I have it, that line above there. It says that the information for the EC was emailed to the section chief of the Cyber Counterintelligence Coordination section at the FBI. So guess what? That puts Charlie McConigal right in the middle of things as this be a very large tip that is potentially launching the largest investigation ever into a president and their affiliations with a foreign government. And he's mentioned in one way, just there, you say he gets the tip, but then later on, there are no discussions. He's not even involved in the discussions in the OIG report. It seems unusual to me that the guy who got the tip with his experience in cyber and counterintelligence would not be getting this information directly and being part of the conversation with everybody, including, you'd expect the director, Jim Comey, to be involved in that kind of stuff. So I am asking in genuine concern about what happened at the FBI, because that kind of thing could happen again and again and again. There have been so many allegations that this particular FBI investigation was not quite right, especially as we got into October and November, and the New York field office's involvement in the Wiener emails, especially then. It certainly began to stink then. But the fact that we had now Crossfire Hurricane being a bit of a disappointment on many levels, the fact that we have this lack of visibility or transparency with even the director of the FBI, and the fact that the tip went from an agent of Israel's, we believe potentially an agent from Israel's, all the way into the hands of Charlie McGonigal, who's potentially being paid off by Albania and who knows who else, Oleg Deripaska maybe. It's not clean. I mean, you can't say this is a clean looking thing. You've got to be asking questions about whether there was real, prosecutorial missteps in how this was investigated, and why so little was discovered at the time. Now we're almost out of time, so I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going here for. But I did want to share. Maybe I should just stop there because there is so much. I will take any questions if anyone has. If you're on either of the chat rooms in Twitter or you're on YouTube, I'll happily take any questions here for the last few minutes. It's one of the reasons I love doing the show live, is because you get instant feedback, and am I way off, guys? Am I asking questions that are just ridiculous, or how come we've been in a situation where we've got this guy, this investigator at the FBI, who's in charge of cyber counterintelligence, and of course this is how so much of this happened, and we've got questions around the GRU thing, we've got questions around Papadopoulos over here, we've got questions around the hack of the DNC, we've got questions around how there was a leak to WikiLeaks and Roger Stone, and now we have questions around Crossfire Hurricane. I mean, it seems to me that there are many, many questions to be asked about this. And someone online is saying it's terrifying. It is terrifying because, we're going to have another election soon. And guess what they're going to be investigating? Classified documents. So, that's going to be Joe Biden's emails, potentially. These are the kinds of things that we need to discuss now in the peace and quiet of the midterms or post-midterm that we have now. We should be really figuring out how we're going to safeguard the elections in 2024 so there isn't so much investigating and interruption of the normal political processes by FBI investigations, because it's so easy to go up and say, hey, this person may have committed this crime, let's launch an investigation. But it can color the entire process. If we're going to be doing investigating and clearing people or whatever, let's do it well before we get into election season. The election season should be pure and uninterrupted by these committees, by FBI, by anybody else. And certainly now with the history of the FBI, if some of these things are borne out to be inaccurate or accurate, and the allegations are that there might have been some missteps in the FBI investigations, then it's going to really color whatever the FBI does going forward. All right, so I'm going to leave it there for tonight. I would love to, if I could, get in Rachel Bitterkoffer here at the end. I'm going to just quickly spend a second seeing if I can find that longer clip, if it in fact exists. And if not, I promise, Rachel, somehow we've had the weirdest luck with Rachel's stuff before. So if I can't do it now, what I'll do is I'll post it as a separate video joined to this as a next video on YouTube, and then I'll post it separately as something we can put onto Twitter, so everyone at least gets to hear Rachel's very brilliant analysis of what happened in last night in the State of the Union. Okay, I'm guessing that I can't pull off this miracle of editing something while I'm live on the air, but let me double check that if that's in fact the truth. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say I should probably trust my gut here and say that I'm going to let the TV gods or the internet gods let us wait until this is released separately as a separate clip. And I might do that in just a few minutes after the show tonight. So again, I'm looking for questions. If there are any, I can't see any on the Twitter feed. If anyone has any questions that you'd like to share, I really would appreciate it. Or on YouTube. If not, that's tonight's show. I apologize for the clumsiness of the show, although I'm sure you'll agree that, boy, there's a lot of interesting material in here that needs to be asked. Questions around the FBI investigation. And so we shall We shall be working on that for you next week as we continue our McGonagall affair investigations. Stay tuned. In a few minutes, and I'll try to get back up with Rachel Bitterkoffer, and I'll answer any other questions you have on this and any other stories we've been covering here on Narativ. Have a fantastic night. We shall see you again soon.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives. One day, you'll